So let's talk about the polio vaccine, the different versions of polio vaccines, and problems with the polio vaccine. So polio virus is a RNA virus that is transmitted via the oral fecal route. So that means individuals typically become infected by ingesting the virus, and the virus infects cells in the GI tract, and individuals shed the virus via their fecal matter. So what does the virus do? Does it cause disease? In about 1% of individuals who are infected by polio virus, it causes damage to the nervous system, specifically motor neurons. So in most individuals who are infected by polio virus, they might suffer symptoms of generalized viral infection, but no damage to their motor neurons because the polio virus stays within the GI tract. But in a small percentage of individuals, the virus leaves the GI tract, infects the nervous system, and damages motor neurons. Damaging motor neurons would lead to an impaired ability to contract and relax muscles. So it causes a type of paralysis that could possibly lead to death or permanent injury to motor neurons. So you'll typically see pictures, maybe historical pictures, although poliovirus is still around. Polio causing individuals to be paralyzed, having their legs or even arms not work properly because they are not able to send signals to their muscles in their limbs due to the death or damage to motor neurons. So many individuals who had become infected by polio were bound to wheelchairs or had to have leg braces in order to help them move. In some percentage of individuals who were infected by polio, they would have difficulty breathing. Why? If you recall from Russian biology, you require muscle contraction and relaxation in order to ventilate your lungs, specifically contracting and relaxing the diaphragm muscles and the rib muscles. If the polio virus damaged the motor neurons that send signals to those muscles, then you wouldn't be able to breathe and you would die. This is why you see pictures of individuals in these machines called iron lungs. The iron lung would help ventilate, help you breathe via increasing and decreasing pressure in that chamber, causing your thoracic cavity to increase and decrease volume so that you would ventilate into your lungs. So poliovirus used to be a very big problem, but it isn't anymore in most parts of the world because of vaccinations. In the 1950s, Jonas Salk invented a vaccine for polio. This was a killed vaccine. So we learned about the different types of vaccines. He had determined a way to take the three most common strains of polio, grew them in the lab, and inactivated them chemically. And this vaccine was injected in individuals, and it provoked a fairly good immune response, fairly good memory response. So it was the first vaccine. It was used very widely in the 1950s. In the 1960s, a better vaccine was introduced, developed by Albert Sabin. This was a live attenuated vaccine. And live attenuated vaccines seem to provoke a much stronger immune response, with much fewer viral particles. You don't need to inject or administer a lot of the virus because it will replicate in the host, mimic a more natural infection, and provide a better immune response. So the Sabin vaccine was a live attenuated virus. He grew it in the laboratory, grew it in animals, and was able to generate a version of the virus in the lab that would typically not cause disease in humans. And it covered also the three most common strains of the polio virus and is known as the Trivalent oral polio vaccine. This vaccine, the Sabin vaccine, was oral because it infected the individual naturally, given via the oral route went down into the digestive tract, infected cells in the GI tract, and mimicked a natural infection. But again, would not typically cause disease. So much easier to administer and provided a much stronger immune response, which is why vaccinations switched from using the Salk vaccine, the inactivated version, to the Sabin vaccine. Now, this is a good time to talk about problems with vaccines, because there have been problems with vaccines and there can still be problems with vaccines, and both versions had problems at one point or another. The Salk vaccine, for example, which we just said was the killed or inactivated polio vaccine, at one point did actually cause disease because batches of the vaccine were not properly inactivated. So a killed vaccine could cause problems because if it's not properly chemically inactivated and can replicate, it will be able to cause disease. And there were some cases of individuals who contracted polio via the Salk vaccine. Nowadays, there's much better quality control, and individuals are not getting coming down with polio or the paralysis due to polio via the inactivated vaccine, because much better quality control these days. With the Sabin vaccine, the live attenuated virus, there is a chance that the virus mutates back to the virulent strain. So let's review the Sabin vaccine. So polio virus is an RNA virus. And if you know anything about RNA viruses, is that RNA viruses have a high mutation rate. And that's due to the nature of the biochemistry of RNA replication, RNA virus replication. So Sabin grew this virus in the lab, and the virus was mutated. So the live attenuated version of the virus, grown in the laboratory, is a mutant form of the virus. It will infect individuals. So we call it a live attenuated version. It'll infect, but it will not cause disease. So individuals are administered the Sabin vaccine orally, and the virus will travel down the digestive tract. It will infect cells in the GI tract, and the virus will replicate. And while the virus is replicating, the immune system is detecting the pathogen. Hopefully you're activating a B lymphocyte response and a T lymphocyte response, and you're getting a primary immune response, which will give you that protective immunity. That's what you're hoping for. In a very, very small percentage of vaccinations, the virus will mutate back to the virulent version. Now, most likely anytime individuals are taking in the live Sabin vaccine, since it is an RNA virus and it is replicating, it's going to probably mutate, right? Because RNA viruses, via their nature, will mutate at some rate. But what are the odds that it's going to mutate all the way back to having its ability to cause disease? Very, very small chance, but it's not zero. And in fact, in some individuals, it has happened that the virus has mutated back to the dangerous virulent version that would cause disease. So is this individual who's taking the virus vaccine going to get the disease? Actually, probably not. Usually not. Sometimes they will, but usually if the virus is mutating back to the virulent version, there's enough protective immunity from the B cell and T cell responses that have been going on that they'll have protective immunity while the virus is mutating back to the normal or wild type version. So it is possible for the individual who's getting the vaccine to come down with the paralysis due to the polio virus reverting back to its wild type version. What's more common, though, in cases like this, that the virus mutates back to its virulent version, is the individual who is administered the vaccine is protected because their immune response, their primary immune response is activated, and they're producing effector T cells and effector B cells, so that they're getting protection. But what happens more often in this case is that if the virus mutates, back to its virulent version. Again, very, very, very rarely. But if it does, then in the fecal matter of this child, and usually we're talking about children getting vaccinated with polio, in their fecal matter, they might have polio virus that is now mutated back to the virulent version. If that fecal matter is handled by, let's say, another individual who hasn't been vaccinated, then that individual will be exposed to the virulent strain of the polio virus, and they can be infected by that polio virus, and they can come down with the paralysis that's associated with polio. Again, about a 1% chance that they would get the paralysis associated with polio virus. But it is possible for the live attenuated version of the polio vaccine to mutate back to the virulent version. And this is why the Sabin vaccine is not sometimes used in countries where polio is not endemic. It is much easier to administer the live attenuated vaccine, but there is a very, very small risk of mutating back to the virulent version.